Hey guys, I'm here to talk to you about energy and the beginning of photosynthesis. So, first, we're going to start with the flow of energy. And I know you know this stuff. You know that energy flows from the sun, our ultimate source of all energy on Earth, to autotrophs like plants and algae. Okay, and then on to plants and algae. Let me write that in there. And then on to all organisms, which are animals as well as plants too, because plants will keep a little bit of that for themselves. And then eventually on to do cellular work. But these three arrows represent the transformations that energy undergoes. So we'll start with the sun. Like, what kind of energy could we say it is? And a lot of people want to say solar, they want to say light, but we're going to put a few more terms to it. We're going to say electromagnetic radiation, for instance. Electromagnetic radiation. Because that is what light is. But light is also a form of kinetic energy as well, because it's in the form of waves. It's in the form of like a motion of some sort. Well, autotrophs pick that up, and obviously through photosynthesis, so we have photosynthesis happening here. I'm just going to abbreviate. Photosynthesis converts that energy into another form. Well, what is that other form? We say sugars a lot of times, sugars, right? That is also, we could say that is also chemical energy. And if we look, it's not kinetic anymore. Now that energy is potential, because the energy is now put into those bonds in that glucose molecule. All the atoms are held together with those bonds, and that's where the energy is like stored. So it has a lot of potential now. Well, all organisms will go through cellular respiration. So we'll just write respiration here. Okay. And that respiration will convert that sugar into yet another chemical type of energy. But this time it's our good old friend ATP. And that too is a type of potential energy. It's just converted to like another form. Once the energy comes out of the bonds of glucose, that energy will go into putting that last phosphate onto the ATP, onto the ADP, I should say. Okay, and like lock and loading it, right? And then when that phosphate breaks off, boom, it's going to go into like doing cellular work. Okay, so that's a good overview, and it's something that we should always like kind of refer to. All right, now out of all of these things, we've already studied ATP, so we can kind of like check that off. We know a lot about ATP, and we also know a lot about sugars, right? But the thing that we don't know a whole heck of a lot, unless you've taken like many, many years of physics, okay, and or even just the first year of physics, you might get into electromagnetic radiation. You also might get into that in chemistry. So we're going to focus on light, okay, and specifically we're going to focus on visible light. Okay, so I'm going to flip this over just to block out like some of the things. And I know this bled through, so hopefully let me get another sheet so it doesn't distract you there or something. So we're going to talk about visible light, which is just one part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, an electromagnetic spectrum, let me move this down a little bit so you can see it. And there goes my mouse. I just picked it off my table. Anyway, one part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So let's look at that electromagnetic spectrum. Here's my little drawing of it, okay? Disregard these other words that are coming up. Electromagnetic spectrum, if we actually went from the highest energy, right? So this end would have highest. I know you can't see that right now. Let me lift that up a little bit here. Highest energy down at this end. Okay, the highest energy is down at that end. And the lowest, put a T on the end and you can't quite see that H. The lowest energy is down here. And why is that? Well, I often like to say, like, imagine you had a big jump rope, right? And you wanted to like make like a wave with it, and you were shaking your hand up and down with somebody else, right? Well, if you just want to make a big wave, you just have to move your hand up and down real slowly to make that. But if you had to make these tiny waves, you'd have to put a lot of energy into it to make those waves. Okay, and gamma rays and X-rays are very tiny wavelengths, but radio waves are huge wavelengths. Okay, now what is this little like funnel that I drew here? That's the visible light spectrum. That is what living organisms deal with. That's good old Roy D. Biv, but we're going to say it backwards, Viv Dior, because Roy, red, has the longest wavelength and violet has the shortest wavelength. So red then has the least amount of energy, violet has the most amount of energy, which is going to be important when we think about why are plants green? And we're going to answer that question, why are plants green? So there's a few other things I want to mention here. And first, it's this over here, okay? If you go into a physics class, okay, or even a chemistry class, they'll talk about this wave particle nature of light. What does that mean? Yes, light travels in waves, but as Einstein theorized that E equals mc squared, that energy can be converted to mass. And that's the wave particle nature of light. The waves, the energy of waves can be converted to mass, but that mass or particle, okay, is called the photon. Okay, and photons are very important because when light strikes something, it actually hits it with photons, almost like those little phosphates that break off of the ATP molecule, and it super energizes then the particles. Okay, now then I have this statement: wavelength versus energy. Can you say the relationship between wavelength and energy now, like after we did this electromagnetic spectrum? Hopefully you can. You can say those that have the lowest wavelength have the highest amount of energy, and those that have the highest wavelength have the lowest amount of energy. Good. So that's a little bit about that. Then we want to talk about three other words. What's the difference between reflected, transmitted, and absorbed? Those three words, okay? Well, reflected and transmitted are both energies, or when the light is going to be sent back somewhere. Okay, reflect it, directly reflect it back. Transmit it, it's going to move on to something. Okay, like when light passes through a window, it's transmitting that energy through to another place. But when light strikes a color such as blue, everything's absorbed except for the blue, which is reflected. So we want to think of reflected as that which we can see. It's seen. Okay, and absorbed, not seen. Transmitted, we just don't count that for right now. Okay, so transmitted, okay, or excuse me, absorbed and reflected. Which one's more important? Is it more important the color you see when it comes to photosynthesis and plants? Because we all know plants are generally green. Like if you ask a little kid, what color are plants? They'll say they're green. Okay, why are they green? Because is the green seen or is it not seen? Well, it's seen, so that means it's reflected. Whereas all the other colors, the Vib and the Yor, the Roy and the Biv, in other words, are being reflected or being absorbed, excuse me. Okay, and we're going to find out why. Why do plants reflect green but yet want to absorb the Roy and the Biv? Why is it so important to absorb those colors and yet reflect green? Like, why did green be the one to be reflected? Is it because it's in the middle of the road? A little bit, and we'll see why. Okay, and hold that thought for a minute. But let's talk about one other piece of equipment here, and it's called the spectrophotometer. Sounds like a big thing, right? Well, it's an instrument that will measure the absorption of light, and it's very important to know these spectrophotometers, okay, in regards to energy, especially spectrophotometers are very important in talking about solar energy. They want to like figure out how much can be absorbed, and these are the instruments that are going to measure that. Okay, they measure things that are absorbed, not reflected, the absorbed ones. So they're actually measuring the ones that we don't see. In other words, okay, so what do they give us? Once they measure this, what does it give us? It produces what we call an absorption spectrum, and you're going to see this on the next page, an example. And it's basically a graph plotting the pigments versus the pigment's absorption, like how much each pigment, so how much is red, how much is orange, how much is yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, absorbing versus their wavelength, okay? Sorry, my phone's like ding-and-dallying here. So we're going to go on. that something else that's similar to an absorption spectrum is what we call an action spectrum. And an action spectrum is going to measure the rate of photosynthesis versus wavelength. Now, remember, for photosynthesis, it's the absorption that's going to be important. So that's why these two things are going to go together. Okay. And finally, I just want to mention pigments. Okay. When we talk about plants, there's three main pigments that we have to talk about. Well, the main one is definitely chlorophyll A. He is the main man. He is the main photosynthesizing one. This gives plants kind of a blue-green color, if anything. Chlorophyll B is the second in command, I would say. He's kind of an olive green, but we do call him an accessory pigment. And then there's carotenoids. Those are the ones that you see in the fall, that after the chlorophylls die off, the carotenoids are still there to protect. Those are the yellows and the oranges, and even some of the reds get in there too. Okay, and those are also accessory pigments, which they can help out with photosynthesis, but very, very little, almost like to the point of where we don't even consider these two pigments to be like mainly involved with photosynthesis. But these, an interesting thing about yellows and oranges, actually protect chlorophyll from harmful light. So think of it like kind of like a jacket or wearing a pair of sunglasses. The carotenoids are like sunglasses for our chlorophyll A. All right, so I'm going to stop there and we'll continue on in a moment here. Okay, I get my mouse that I kicked off the table to like click this off, which is way over here. Okay, and we are